Good afternoon, everyone.
That's the question.
I know we have this huge crowd here, okay, not. We have a little slightly sparse crowd.
But the best crowd.
But the best crowd. This is the Metropolitan Council Committee of the Whole on May 21st, 2025. We don't have a quorum, but we do have interested council members here, so this is largely informational, so we are not gonna have the only action would be to approve the minutes, so we'll hold that until next time. But as been our tradition, we started going alphabetically, but we've given that up, and Councilmember Lee has offered to read our Dakota Land, Water, and People Authority.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Metropolitan Council acknowledges that the land we currently call Minnesota, and specifically the 7-county region, is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota Oyate, who are present and active contributors to our thriving region. As part of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to address the unresolved legacy of genocide, dispossession, and settler colonialism, and the fact that government institutions, including the Metropolitan Council, benefited economically, politically, and institutionally after the forcible removal of the Dakota Oyate, the Metropolitan Council is dedicated to instilling land, water, and people commitments in regional policy. These commitments support the Dakota Oyate, the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, Ho-Chunk Nation, and the American Indian community representing over 150 diverse tribal nations that call the 7-county region home.
Thank you. Today we have two information items, the Climate Action Work Plan Annual Report, which is not to be confused with the Climate Action Plan for the region. We're going to hear more about that. And then an update on our audit practices and what's new there. And we'll, as I said, defer the minute approval for at least till the end of the meeting, and we might actually have one more council member, in which case we will have a quorum, but until then, we can start in on our information. Lisa, do you want to set us off? I know we're gonna have Lisa, Jeff, Jen, a whole group. Welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. It's our pleasure to be in front of you today, and there's a big group of us because this is a big effort across the organization. And for the record, I'm Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of the Community Development Division, and I'll allow my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Laura Brethheim, Project Coordinator for Sustainability at Metro Transit.
Good afternoon, Jen Kostrowski, Assistant Manager, Water Policy and Planning with Environmental Services.
Jeff Freeman, Sustainability Manager for Metro Transit.
So we're pleased to be before you today to present our annual report on our progress in implementing the Climate Action Work Plan. And just some grounding information before we jump into the headlines of our awesome results. But as you all know, climate change has impacts across all of Met Council services, our investments and our assets that we have responsibility for. We also have the ability to make an impact on climate change in our region across all of our work. This is why you see a cross-divisional team, and you'll hear more about our cross-divisional efforts as we go through this work. Our Climate Action Work Plan defines the vision for our work, which is to reduce our contributions to greenhouse gas emissions and to make our services and facilities resilient to the impacts of climate change. So really just being good stewards of the assets that we're responsible for. Our work plan has a structure that is organized around 6 core commitments, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the upcoming slides. And under each of those commitments, we've identified 20 strategies that are scattered amongst those 6 commitments that are those overarching approaches to how we are going to advance those commitments. And then beneath that, 73 more specific actions and projects that are defined around what we're actually going to do or what we hope to do. So for our 5-year plan, 73 actions can seem like a lot, but I would like to remind you all that you asked us to be ambitious about this work and not to constrain ourselves just on what we had for staff or funding available at the time of writing this plan, that we wanted to be ready in case we had opportunities to either add staff, take advantage of funding opportunities at whether it was at the state level or at the federal level. And having gone through a couple of years of implementing that plan, we did see that having developed this plan in this fashion did allow us to be shovel ready, if you will, to apply for grant opportunities when they did become available. We didn't get them all, but we were ready. We had had the conversations, we knew what it would take to get things going, and we had already, through your adoption of this plan, identified that as actions that that you had all supported staff in taking, so that we could come to you rather than starting, come to you with that permission to apply rather than starting from here's why we think we should apply for this, and really get to application in a faster process. So even if, so what you'll hear about today is not just what we're accomplished, but is we'll also talk more about some of our project highlights around this last year. The core commitments on this slide are rooted in environmental justice principles and then organized into pairs of commitments around reducing emissions, so commitments 2 and 3, and adapting to climate change, commitments 4 and 5. Those pairs both have an operation or internal focused commitment, and then an external or partnership focused commitment. Our 6th commitment is a cross-cutting one that supports getting the work done and expanding our staffing and training to build the workforce across the council to actually accomplish this plan. As a note, the icons that you see on the left-hand side of the screen will be a guide for you in the upcoming slides as we share some of the charts around the work that we're doing. So we don't have to crowd them all with more words, but just keep an eye on those as you see these upcoming slides as well. So today we'll be sharing with you progress across those commitments, and we'll be taking turns speaking to each of those areas. So I'll be starting off with some themes for 2024 and an overview of progress across against those actions, and then we'll turn to progress on mitigation, the mitigation related commitments, and then the adaptation related commitments. And as I mentioned before, sharing some project highlights along the way. In 2024, as I'm sure you're all well aware, many of our staff are really turning and focusing on the development of climate policy for Imagine 2050, and a lot of our efforts were really in that focus on the region. As you've heard at your last committee of the whole, we also have been working on our EPA-funded climate pollution reduction grant, the planning related to that work, engagement related to that work, because we see a lot of integration across the broader regional plan across the council, the work plan that focuses on our operations and how we walk the talk of our policy, and then using that grant opportunity to further expand our efforts to help meet our both operational goals, but our Imagine 2050 goals as well. And as I mentioned previously, we really are focused at commitment 6 on staffing was a clear focus for us in 2024 as well, really focusing on developing an understanding of what the actual staffing needs are across the council, not just what number of FTEs do we need, but are we organized the right way? Do we have the right positions to accomplish the work that we're trying to do? And then do we have shared positions across our divisions where we could be working together on developing what those look like and hiring together, or sharing in those opportunities, rather than trying to recreate the wheel within each of our divisions for what might be very similar roles in the different parts of our operations. So our team has been working on identifying those gaps and building that understanding, as well as creating recommendations to help us move forward in that on that staffing role. On this slide, you'll see that we have over half of our 73 actions are on track or complete. It's a nice to be able to report that for you all, especially since we're about halfway through the life of this plan. So we're about halfway through being on track for this plan. A lot of our actions that are complete are related to commitments or strategies that we had identified for our regional planning efforts. So with the adoption of Imagine 2050, we're able to check those boxes and say that we've gotten those items done. And for our on-track actions, we have a lot of work that we're turning to now that are supporting local government planning efforts and building the tools and resources to help them do that. We do have on hold some efforts, especially on items around establishing work groups that help us manage our energy across our divisions. It's not on hold because we don't want to do the work, but more related to getting the staff in place to do the work so that we can create the teams across our divisions to work together on that. And then we do have a bucket of actions in that gray bar that you'll see at the top that are meant to be started later than 2025 or in 2025. So they're not quite yet started, but we're at the stage of thinking about whether we're ready to do those or if those are in following years as well.
So that was the overall story, and now I'm gonna zoom in a little bit on those commitments that were focused towards the region. And so that would be commitment 3 and commitment 5. So accelerating the reduction of regional emissions and also advancing the regional climate adaptation efforts. The good news is, if we start looking a little bit closer, that for commitment 3, 89% of the actions are on track or complete. And if we look at commitment 5, 56% of the actions are on track and or complete. And so as you can see, we've made some really significant progress on those commitments that were regionally focused. And we know that there are still some that are still left to either complete or start, but we know that those will be hopefully wrapped up into the implementation of 2050. I will say the adoption of 2050, as Lisa mentioned before, really gave us a good grounding to move forward in this area. That being said, there's 2 other components when we start thinking about our ability to do the work. There's the funding and there's the staffing. The good news is that we do have many funding sources. I won't say everything is completely funded. We still have some challenges to figure out with some funding. But I will say one of the bigger and more significant challenges, I would say, is actually staffing the work right now. And so we're in the process. I will personally say, like, I'm excited. I just brought on my climate adaptation planner just last couple weeks, 3 weeks ago. Time has gone so quickly. And so we're starting to see the impact of having the staff join us to increase our capacity to do this work. And so that is a trend that I hope continues, not just for environmental services, but for all of the divisions, so that we will have the capability to do the commitments that we have put into the plan.
All right, I'm gonna jump into our second and third commitments about reducing emissions. The second commitment is more focused on our operational emissions reductions, and the third is about our regional emissions reductions. And I'll start by talking about our operational emissions reductions. So we've completed our 2024 greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the Met Council. In 2024, the Council's operations emitted approximately 375,000 metric tons of equivalent carbon dioxide. Now, what does that large number mean? We try to put it into things we can understand a little more easily. So that's about the same as the amount of energy 51,000 homes use in a year. So population-wise, that's about the size of Carver County if we look at a 2.5 people per household, or equivalent to about 88,000 cars being driven for a year. And if we think about 2-car households, that's slightly larger than the cars in the city of Bloomington. So we're a big operation, and we know that, and we know we have an impact, but that also means that we have an opportunity to make a big impact when we reduce our emissions. So to break it down a little bit more by division, the light blue bar on the bottom is environmental services, and you'll see this shows our emissions from 2015 to 2024. ES makes up most of the greenhouse gas emissions of the council, mostly from the energy it takes to treat wastewater. Then the red bar is Metro Transit. That's the second highest group in terms of our division output. Most of our emissions are from operating our vehicles, and we'll dig into that next. The dark blue bar at the top is MTS transit services. And so that's a smaller portion. And then if you zoom in really closely on your slides, you can see 390 Roberts Street is in the tiny light blue for regional administration and CD. So if you can't see it, it's a very small part, but it is there. And so then to give a closer look into what do our what are the sources of our emissions in each division. Like I said, environmental services emits the most greenhouse gases. Most of it is from the electricity used to process and treat wastewater. Some of it's from heating our buildings, so the natural gas we use. A small amount of it is from the vehicle fleet that serves CD and ES. But then if we look over at transit, most of our emissions are from the bus fleet, followed closely by our electricity for our buildings and our electricity used to power the light rail system. So those are our big sources for transit, for MTS and regional administration, which does get its small line there. Most of it is from the bus fleet as well. And so you can see that in Metro Transit and in MTS, the bus fleet emissions are fairly comparable, and one thing that we're able to do looking into the future is start to understand how our fleet efficiency is improving, and not just transitioning to electric vehicles, but improved fuel economy in our fleet, and we can track that over time with our reduced emissions as well. One thing I'll just note too is that there are greenhouse gas emissions that are inherent to the wastewater treatment process. Our treatment engineers can speak to this in much more detail than I can. Those emissions we've omitted from this visualization this year because we're working on some improved methodology to have a lot of confidence in that value. So I'm gonna pass it over to Jeff in a minute, who's gonna talk about where we're going with our greenhouse gas emissions tracking and being able to tell that story, and he'll talk a little bit more about that. But starting, this is the aggregate view of all of our greenhouse gas emissions, and Jeff is gonna talk more about metrics to kind of scale our greenhouse gas emissions to our service.
Brian, just a quick question.
Just a clarifying question
Yes,
for you too.
yeah.
So as we look at like the bus and rail fleet pieces here, so my assumption is the metric ton CO2 equivalent on the rail fleet is due to the electricity generated and the source of how the electricity is generated, right? Okay.
Yep.
So even as you electrify your bus fleet, if your utilities are not transitioning to clean sources, you would still end up having some level of CO2 equivalent. That's what I wanted to check out.
Yep, exactly. So we've got that, we can keep track of that as well, yeah.
So, clarify, when we first started doing this work, the grid number in MROW, which is the grid that serves this region, was about 826 kilograms per megawatt. Today, we're at 420 kilograms per megawatt. We've seen almost a 50% reduction in the grid efficiency within the region. Excel's done a great job. Other utilities have done a very solid job of reducing what their generational component of the mix is, whether it's solar, which is just a small slice, wind, which is a notable slice here. Excel's got their nuclear plants, and we still have some other, some conversions from coal plants to natural gas that continue to go on throughout the region. So we're seeing that number go down. The next 50% for the utilities is gonna be a little bit harder than the last 50%, and obviously splitting it again after that to get it to down to around 100. That's where the real work is for them, so.
It's good to stop on, just because one more follow, Mr. Chair. It's always this reminder that behind the things we see, if you're not making utilities run on more and more, renewable sources of energy as a larger share, what you see can only become so much, so renewable as you rely more and more on electricity. So I appreciate the state's push on renewables with Xcel and other public utilities, and this just reminds me how important it is even for like our operation to get toward those goals.
And it dovetails into the idea that all the conservation efforts we take are leveraged by these. When we reduce the amount of electricity we're using within a facility or in an operation, we get to move that fulcrum back because of the utility has changed. They've reduced the amount of emissions per unit of energy that we consume. So I think I'm going on to this one. So understanding our emissions at Metro Transit. For years we've tried to put out metrics that are really more meaningful, that are something somebody can put their arms around. I remember one time we used something called MMBTU per passenger mile. Anybody in here knows what an MMBTU looks like in their gas tank? Raise your hand and you get a prize. It's about 8.
Sorry, no, go start.
It's a little over 8 gallons of gas, but it's one of those things. What does this really mean? So we've been looking at how do we tell our story of what we're doing on our buses. So here we've kind of flipped the script and said, how many miles can a bus travel before it emits a ton of CO2e? And on this slide you're seeing back in 2018, which we use as a good reference here because of the fact that it's pre-COVID, system was going pretty good at that time. Number of things were been in play. It's relatively recent as far as I go. 247 miles. Now in 2024, we're seeing 273 miles for that. Some things that factor into it, ABRT is a big factor into that in the BRT systems. There's fewer stops, those buses get better mileage per passenger, so that's something that we can look at. And we'll look again as we're continuing to look to find meaningful metrics, so we can start to use this to make some decisions, not only report on our progress, but also use it to make some decisions in our operations. I think
So
that's-
these are with those passenger miles, not,
No, those are vehicle miles traveled completely, and the CO2 component is all of our Metro Transit emissions. So this is all vehicles traveled, about 25, 26 million, and I think it was the number in 24, something like that. And it's Metro Transit's entire emissions of 85,000 tons. That's how we get to this math.
I make the comment because I always do it at this point, but actually it was brought to me by Councilmember Wolf, so I'll channel her for a minute. Unless we're actually measuring the carbon per passenger mile, we're not taking into account the benefit of the fact that we are a shared mobility mass kind of, and so even a diesel bus is better than an electric, than 20 electric cars.
Absolutely. Like I've said before to you, some wise man once said, this is about putting people on buses, not what powers the bus. That was you, sir.
That was me. Good. Keep quoting that guy.
I keep telling people, the man knows his stuff. So when we look at MTS, similar situation, looking at what they're there, but in this case, the CO2 is completely fuel based. We don't have operational responsibility to report on their garages that the contractors who provide to operate the system use. But what we're seeing here is that number's a lot closer, because for reality purposes, the E450 chassis that we put the cutaway on hasn't changed much in 6 years. Some of those vehicles are probably still in play. I would guess that were new back in 2018, they still might be in play now, or they're just coming out of service. So we're not seeing as much there, but it's an opportunity for us to look for more opportunities to reduce that fleet and to think what that vehicle needs to look like and what options there are to propel that vehicle. Question?
Just wanted
Tony,
to
go ahead.
follow on the question that you asked, or the point you made, and continue to always make, which is very important. And the fact that we're getting this measurement that is based on the vehicles.
Yep.
Total miles traveled and not passenger miles. We're really looking here at the efficiency factors for our vehicles.
Correct.
You know, whether our vehicles are as efficient before emitting a ton of, or a metric ton of CO2.
Yep.
So I am impressed that we're seeing improvement, and I would imagine the goal then is to continuing to improve that. And hopefully that's what we're doing.
Yep, looking to better understand and define metrics that achieve that better explain the progress we're making that people can relate to. Look, again, I can throw out metrics, we can put together metrics that nobody understands and say, look how good we've done, but if it's not understood, you're not telling your story very well.
Yeah, so for that purpose,
Yep.
this metric is important.
So, and here we're talking about some forthcoming greenhouse gas metrics. And we're like I said, we're in the process. We talk about, just as you were saying, total emissions per passenger mile traveled. We've talked about that before. And what does that look like, comparing ourselves to similar agencies across the country to see how they're doing, benchmark ourselves against people who are doing well, understand what makes their system successful, understand what within our system can be improved to achieve greater success. Emission by type of service, bus, light rail, etc. What are these emissions per passengers? I mean, you look at our NTD report, you see different numbers involved. How does it all fit together? How are we improving? What things have we done that are showing an impact? And then when it comes to facilities, this has been out there for a while. People said, well, what's your emissions goal for the council? I said, we have two things working against us. More people are moving into the region, we're processing more wastewater, and we are hell-bent on expanding our transit system. Those are things that are growing, so it's hard to put a goal on something that's growing and call it meaningful. So we've talked about putting targets for our facilities. on our electrical consumption, our gas consumption, and our goal will be to achieve a certain number of targets. Because then we can, it's tighter, it's something that we can control. We can say, hey, I'm gonna do a project here, it's gonna reduce our energy consumption by 10%. We will meet our target for this facility. Our goal might be a number 80-90% of our targets are hit, something along that. And then we get down to this bottom point here, emissions by process and wastewater treatment. Better understanding of where the emissions come from within the wastewater treatment operation, where we can target. I know they've done a lot of work in the recently or in the recent past, last 5-6 years, you know, working on blowers and other aspects of the process that use a ton of energy, a metric ton of energy. It's bigger than just a regular ton. How do we cut those things down? What are our opportunities? What can we do to reduce our cost associated with that? So a lot of this is, as we start to formulate the work groups, a chance for us to sit down and discuss and try to get similarity between the divisions on how we report. So I think that concludes my time.
Thanks, Jeff. So a couple of project highlights on our mitigation work. Kind of going back to Imagine 2050, we've really integrated that climate mitigation and adaptation strategies, both at that high level goal area of leading on addressing climate change, as well as across the entirety of the plan in our housing chapter, land use, parks, transportation, and water resources. So there are strategies all across that it isn't just left to us in operations or into, you know, just one sector to transportation, but really looking, as I talked about in the beginning of this presentation, how we use all of our different levers, and across this region, how all of our partners use all of our different levers to make a difference to achieving that emissions reduction goal of net zero emissions by 2050 that was directed in state law to be a part of our regional plan, but also to increase regional resilience. It's important to us, but we also know our local government partners have shared this with us, as well as our folks who engaged with us around the regional plan. Residents across the region shared how important it was to live in a resilient region and to be assured that we were thinking about all the changes that they were seeing coming and that we were taking care of the public's investments across this region. And then at the base of this, as we talked about in the Climate Action Work Plan, this is repeated here in Imagine 2050 as well, of really acknowledging and remedying historic and ongoing environmental injustices, really putting that EJ focus as a part of our work and at the core of how we do our work for the long range plan as well. And then one item that I wanted to share before I turn it back to Jeff for another project highlight was some work that we were just getting underway for in our housing authority with our council-owned housing units. We own about 154 units, which are a super skinny slice that doesn't even show up on the chart because they're not actually our emissions. Those are emissions for that household. We don't live in those houses, but what we do want to ensure is that the houses we own actually operate efficiently, effectively, and are climate resilient. It also reduces the energy cost for our residents who are already in, you know, they're low-income households. They don't have a whole lot of extra money to spend, especially if it's an especially cold winter or especially hot summer. So we've started going through our units as they've started to turn over and conducting home energy audits. We were able to accomplish 9, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot when you don't actually live in the unit yourself. We don't want to impinge on the time of our residents. We do offer that opportunity for them and try to share with them why it might be important for them. But we also have folks who are moving in and out of units on a regular basis. So as folks move out, they're like, great, we'll go and take care of that one. And get some assessments on what would be helpful in that particular home. Where are changes that we can make immediately? What are some things that we should be looking at long term? We've done a lot of upfront installations within these units, including things like changing out the lighting, changing out shower heads, thermostats and other items, as well as identifying other things like fixing some HVAC issues that you don't always see that are maybe up in the corner attic or something along those lines. So it's been a really great way to start, and we're thinking about now how we continue to communicate with our residents, so we're not just waiting for those for folks to move out before we make a change, but how we can start to help our residents understand the value that they would get and receive. Like, we will do all the work. We just need to have access to the unit to do this work, to do that audit and then to plan ahead for this. So we're continuing to work at our communication strategies and figuring out how we can do more, but it's something that both allows us this opportunity to make some quick, easy fixes upfront, and then think about longer term strategies for larger capital improvements that we might be able to do across a larger portion of our portfolio at the same time. Replace several furnaces, for example, at the same time. We're able to purchase several at the same time, maybe get some cost savings on that, especially on the installation portion. So we're excited for getting this started and recognize that it will probably take us some time to get to where we want to be. And then when we finish all of them, we'll probably be right back at the beginning again and starting on re-auditing our original set. So we're looking forward to doing more of this work, especially for the impact it can have for our residents and reducing their energy costs on a monthly basis. Turn to Jeff.
Keep it on, just play one. Lisa said something there that dovetails right into this slide. She said, we'll get this all done and then we'll be right back at the beginning of this. And this is where we are currently today with our building automation systems at our large facilities. A lot of this work started 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. Since then, the manufacturer of the technology, we're on the communications platform within the technology. They're on their second generation, which means it's time to upgrade, because it's like any piece of technology we have. I don't think anybody in here is running an iPhone 4 anymore. Everybody's upgraded. This is the time, and with that project, it is our BES system for our controls, our HVAC, heating and cooling within our larger our facilities. It helps us maintain temperature settings. I think one of the key things in our service garages is it gets us off of something called prescribed ventilation, which is you need to move so many cubic feet per minute of air based on a square foot, and lets us go to demand-based ventilation, where we have sensors within the garage that measure NOx, which is nitrous oxides, and carbon monoxide, and when those certain thresholds are met, the ventilation changes. So in the middle of the day, when there's no activity going on in the garage, buses are all out on the street, we're at a minimum ventilation rate. As we pull out in the morning, and sometimes even when we come back in the evening, that ventilation escalates.
So it's like the lights going off, I mean.
Correct, similar concept, absolutely, except for in this case, not only it's got gradual, it's kind of like dimming down to nothing, or to very low. Absolutely, and the key part of this is it gives us a lot of opportunity to control things within our facilities and monitor our energy usage. The timing of the original work predates us taking comprehensive measurement of our energy consumption, so it's really hard to baseline and say, yeah, this thing's saving this much a year. It's just, it seems like for me now, we've been doing this forever, before I even started measuring energy and tabulating greenhouse gases, as it kind of all ties together as this is something we've always done and will continue to do. And currently we're in this project, it's a state of good repair, but it's also an energy enhancement to make sure all our systems are tied together and working properly.
So some of my colleagues might not like the statement I'm gonna make, but some of my best colleagues that I work with, you can't even see. They're the microbes that are in our wastewater treatment plant. And they work day in and day out. They are
Relentless.
very dedicated, yeah. Present company excluded, you guys are pretty great. Those colleagues need dissolved oxygen to do their work. That's the paycheck that we give them. And in exchange, they help us treat our wastewater. In order to get that dissolved oxygen into our wastewater treatment processes, we need blowers and aeration pumps to get that going, which means energy. I have colleagues that have been doing a pilot project at the Eagles Point wastewater treatment plant. This is an amazing story because they have been tweaking and changing the amount of dissolved oxygen that our microbes have been using to treat our wastewater. And they've been able to get a pilot going that does not impact our treatment capabilities, but lowers the amount of dissolved oxygen that we use in our processes. And this has been able to reduce our energy costs by 40%. Eagles Point is a small plant out in Cottage Grove. If you haven't gone to it, it is one of my favorite ones, so you should go. It's adorable.
District 12.
Thank you very much. It's this, but it's not necessarily, it is good plant to be doing experiments in. And so this is the hope of environmental services to continue with this investigation and this innovation. I'm not saying we are ready to jump to Metroplant right now to use this technology, but that's the trajectory that we're hoping to do. And so as we are using our smaller plants as experimental sites to see these energy wins, we can start figuring out how we can apply the lessons that we've learned at the small scale and continue to scale it up. And so while this is at one plant, we do have, I'm sorry, I should be saying water resource recovery facilities. I need to continue to train myself on using the new terminology. While this is at one of our facilities, we have 8 others that we could be thinking about applying this technology. So it's just, starting small and scaling up. And I think that the trajectory is showing that we can use this emerging innovation to really help us with energy and financial savings.
Your analogy was great, right up until you cut their compensation by 40% to achieve results.
Thank you, I'll work on that. They might be my favorite colleagues, but they don't like us right now.
So a culture survey?
Don't survey.
But you know what, here we slant, they'll learn.
That's true.
So next we'll turn to our climate adaptation efforts with commitments 4 and 5. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the work that we've been doing in supporting regional adaptation. As I know several of our you have heard about, our colleagues have been working with local governments and most recently at a climate planning summit with local government partners to discuss best approaches to adaptation for the 2050 local comprehensive planning process. Local governments were really receptive to using a hazards-based approach for adaptation planning. Like, what should we be worried about? What should we be concerned about as we think about the types of climate changes we're most likely to be seeing in this region, and how do we adapt our efforts to those? So using this hazards-based approach, especially given the fact that many local governments already perform this work in collaboration with county level hazard mitigation planning and on their own local asset management. This approach allows for a high degree of buy-in from local governments that can also be a little more politically palatable across the whole range of work that folks are doing across the entire region. We also found that local governments are using our extreme heat tool, which you see on the bottom of the screen here, to efficiently plan for land use and green infrastructure interventions to highly localized parts of their communities. St. Louis Park is a good example of where they offer low or no cost trees in high heat areas that they've identified by using our mapping tool. And the city of Hopkins also pursued and obtained an MPCA grant using our tool and Met Council data to plan for specific heat-prone areas within their city. This effort has led to concept-level planning for a resilience hub within the city of Hopkins, which is a physical building to offer respite for local residents during high heat events as well. So it's some of that work that we do isn't necessarily about adapting the things we own at the council, but helping the region to adapt to the changes that we're seeing as well, and recognizing that one of the benefits of working in a great organization like ours is that we also have access to a lot of resources that not all local governments have. They don't have a team of researchers that can create this sort of analysis and tools for them. It also gives local staff that context of what other folks might be experiencing in the region as well. They can see what's happening across the region and then zoom into their city and see, oh, I see, we're a little bit hotter than the folks to the north. Maybe I want to ask someone else, maybe to the south who's hotter like we are, what they might be doing. So that those contexts are some of the reasons that local staff have shared with us how much they appreciate the tools that we're able to produce for them. And there's more to come in that front as well as we continue to build out supports for the upcoming local planning process, and we'll be in front of you in the future to talk more about that.
Another project highlight that I want to make sure that you get to hear about is our success within the sustainable landscapes within environmental services. We have 11 sites across the region, from wastewater recovery facilities to lift stations, that we have transitioned our traditionally, usually would have been turf grass installations into more sustainable landscapes. And so when I say that, that means trying to get native plantings, including prairie bee lawns, native trees. We have a restored wetland near the Empire Water Resource Recovery Facility. I know, I'm working on it. We have installed green infrastructure. If you do go to the Empire facility, we have not had stormwater runoff from that facility since 2008 because we were able to put together a stormwater treatment train and green infrastructure to allow that water to infiltrate before it gets to the edge of the property. It's also super cool to have it in an industrial setting to show folks that green roofs are not just something fancy that we put on our sports arenas, but it is something that we can put on our our water resource recovery facilities. I will get there. The good news is ES is committing to continue to this. So every time that we are having a project in which we are disturbing the earth, it's an opportunity for us to add that restoration on the back end of the project. And we're not doing this alone. We might be a couple years ahead, but our friends in Metro Transit are also interested in applying some of the lessons that we have learned over time so that we can start broadening our impact of increasing our sustainable landscapes out within the region.
All right, we're going back to our first commitment to get close to the end here and think about environmental justice and how this concept flows throughout our climate action work plan and other aspects of planning here at the council. So the climate action work plan was really kind of created a foundation for our environmental justice work that has broadened now in the past few years. This was where we, when we were writing the climate action work plan, we centered environmental justice commitments, and now as part of Imagine 2050, we have the environmental justice framework, which you'll see on the right there. And these two efforts have really been integrally connected, both because the passionate staff who work on them bring similar expertise, and we've been able to take lessons learned from both processes to really enhance what we're doing in both areas. So as part of Imagine 2050, in developing this environmental justice framework, we did quite a bit of community engagement that really affirmed the critical importance of centering environmental justice for overburdened communities when we do our climate work and when we do many types of planning work. So we're now, with the adoption of Imagine 2050 having just occurred a few months ago, the Climate Action Work Plan and Imagine 2050 environmental justice teams are relaunching to really go to the next phase of work for both of these areas and implementing the environmental justice components in our planning realm, but also in our operational realms to meet the needs of our various divisions.
So commitment 1 helped us frame our why we were doing this work, and I think commitment 6 helped us frame how we're gonna do the how of the work in the climate action plan. And that is our central strategy of expanding staff and having training dedicated for current staff about this climate, doing work within the climate arena. Right now, we have our first cohort of staff moving through the Envision Sustainable Infrastructure training. It is a framework that is nationally acknowledged, and there's a certification at the end of it to help people working within the infrastructure field, and it is broad, so it's all the way from procurement and scoping through the construction and maintenance and operation. So it's the entire life cycle of this infrastructure. It was brought on because we thought it would help council staff think about the work we do in a way that could bring climate lens to our day-to-day activity. 120 staff. We're eventually going to have 120 staff go through the program. Right now, the first 40 are wrapping up. I think their deadline was this week. Yeah, and so I'm excited. I'm in cohort 2, so I'm ready, chomping at the bit to go for cohort 2. In addition to training, we have had some dedicated staff take a look back, look at how we have structured ourselves, look at how our workforce when questioned about how they connect with this climate work, our existing workforce, do an assessment and estimation of how much of our time our staff is dedicated towards this work. And so there was a survey. We also engaged with other peer agencies to try and figure out how they set up their structure. And the good news was at the end of all of that research, we were able to get some recommendations helping us identify gaps in how our structure or where our staffing needs are, and recommendations to move forward so that hopefully we can fill those gaps and be ready to take on the challenges both in this plan and into the future.
So looking ahead, we'll have cohort 2, we promise, thank you very soon. And I just wanted to just recognize that out of our first cohort, and as of about the middle of the month, that we've had 10 of our staff already sit and receive their certification for being environmental sustainability professionals. We've got colleagues from all 5 divisions participating in those cohorts, representing 19 different departments. So it's really, I think, both also helping us develop a shared language around what do we mean when we're talking about these things, and methodologies for how we measure that progress and what strategies look like. So looking forward, we continue to, continue to look at our different funding streams. We obviously have our own funding sources here at the council that are part of our regular budgets, but how we use them to support staff, and we do have a number of different positions that we have in queue for filling this year as well that would be dedicated to this climate work. But kind of related to what Jen was talking about around how we organize our work is also part of that is building in that high-level staff accountability for setting that tone for what the expectations are and making those connections across our divisions to our work as well as tracking that progress. How are we doing when projects are coming in front of us? Are we considering the things that we're expecting to that should be considered as part of our climate work that's in our work plan? It's part of Imagine 2050 that we should be doing these things. As I mentioned at the beginning of this report, we're about halfway through this 5-year plan in time, and we're ready, and as a planning agency, always thinking about that next step, thinking about what that version 2.0 looks like. We're thinking about how we would start that, not as a full-scale rewrite, but sort of as that light update of what have we accomplished and what should we be turning to and prioritizing next. We're expecting to complete that work as a version 2.0 by the end of 2026. So you'll be hearing more from us about that work going forward. But we expect that we'll be continuing the actions that we haven't yet completed, and assessing what else we need to be doing or prioritizing as part of this work, or where we can be doing or enhancing the work that we're doing going forward. And as we've mentioned several times throughout this presentation, that continued action at this regional level, the way, the work that we're doing, not just in our operations, but how we support and are open to partnerships across this region, are really how we get to being effective at advancing our region's work, but also being 60% of the state's population, how we're advancing the state's work around reducing our emissions and adapting to climate change. So before I turn it over to you, I just want to thank everybody, my colleagues on this in front of us today are just representative of a larger team across the council, of which we had to use very teeny tiny letters so we could fit everybody's names on this page. And these are just the folks who are formally involved in our work plan teams. This doesn't represent all of the folks who are also doing climate work as a part of their day-to-day work, like our folks in our colleagues at the Eagles Point plant who are working on dissolved oxygen. That is climate work. It's part of their everyday work. They're just not formally on a team. But I do want to recognize the folks who on this team for their work, because it does take all of us. It does take learning from one another. It takes partnership across our divisions, not just between environmental services and community development, although I love working with Jen, but also with our colleagues in regional administration, in procurement and risk, in our asset management work, which I know our management committee members hear a lot about as well. All of this work is being integrated as how we are more effective in doing this work together. And then before I close, I also really want to thank Laura for her work in helping to pull together our annual report, leading that effort. It is those 73 actions and tracking down how we're doing on that is a lot of work. So really thanks to Laura and the team for Doug and all those folks to give me answers on things too. So before we close, we have a couple of questions. Of course, any feedback or input you have, we always welcome. If there are other things you'd like for us to be thinking about when we're preparing next year's report, as Jeff had mentioned earlier, there's some additional work that we're doing around metrics and how we start to be able to, with confidence, report things like per passenger miles, or how we're doing on emissions, I don't know, as our population grows in our wastewater, like what's the unit of measure we want to use there. We're doing work there, but are there other metrics that we haven't discussed today that you would be interested in hearing about, other projects that might be of interest, other updates that you'd like to hear from us that we haven't shared today? And of course, on partnerships, we kind of want to say we're open for business. We know that that's doesn't come easy. It's sometimes to come with ideas, and sometimes that partnership starts with just idea generation or brainstorming, and we don't want folks to say, okay, here's our project, can you do this for us, Met Council, but more like, hey, we kind of bat some ideas around with you. What do you think about fill in the blank? So we want folks to feel like they can ask us that early, and so if you have any leads on that too, welcome to that. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, and I know we'll have questions and then also some answers, some thoughts. We've been asked questions, so those are great questions. Go ahead. Sue.
Thanks, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, sorry.
No, I'll answer to Madam Chair.
Well, it is a superior sort of title, so,
I appreciate that.
sorry. Smart aleck. I was in a store recently and overheard a conversation between two women who I think were older than me, but I can't say for sure. But I would encourage in the environmental justice area for us to really, maybe in the 2.0, think about the elderly population as it relates to climate change. There's a lot of anxiety going on in every generation, but the elderly generation especially, given the fears of cuts or elimination of benefits that they've worked hard for during their careers. And one of the women talked about how even on that hot day a week or so ago, she was not turning on her air. She had not called her service provider to come and do a checkup. She doesn't want to turn on the air until they come, but she's worried about spending that money to have the checkup, and she's worried about spending the money to have healthy air. And it just made my heart break to think that this woman was going through that. And I think we as a council can work with our communities to really watch out for that group of citizens and residents and taxpayers in our region. I think that they deserve some special TLC as it relates to the kinds of frustrations they're facing. And as Todd Graham, I believe it was, pointed out to us, this is a significant part of our population. And so with that, I'd suggest that. Thanks.
Great. Tony.
Just really appreciate the stories that Councilman Bindle often brings to the table about the experience of real people. And on that point, I was looking to see inside the presentation whether there were any factors related to solar energy that we are bringing to the fore in this plan. And what thoughts there might be there. I know there are questions about efficiency and the conversion of solar to energy, but long term we know the savings, and part of the concern is keeping up with those bills over time. So I'm just wondering about that factor in this plan.
Well, the council has a long history of implementing solar energy at our facilities. It has done a lot of assessment.
And I should have said actually more across the region.
Oh, across the region.
In terms of supporting
Sure.
that change.
That's a different response then.
I'm sorry.
But
Didn't
yeah.
mean to change up.
No, that's totally fine. I was about to turn to Jeff, but I think I'll just keep this one.
Yeah, there's some things we have internally that there, but go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, so the council has been working with the Soul Smart program since its inception, and has had staff on board to serve in a solar advisor role. And especially in the last round of comprehensive planning, we invested a lot of time and effort in helping local governments become solar ready. Everything from policy in their plans to ordinances to permitting processes and all of the things down the road. And in fact, we are the first region to become a Sol Smart designated region as well, both for our operations and for the supports that we provide to local governments. And a number of our local governments has also received that Sol Smart Gold or Silver designation for their preparation as well. So we continue to offer those services for local governments, and as we move into this next round of comprehensive planning, we'll be re-upping and reminding them of the services that we can provide for them there.
Thank you for reminding me of that, and if I might just
Yes,
follow on. So I am familiar with the Soul Start work and the work of governments across the region. Are we tracking that in terms of the changes, and why does that not appear here?
Yeah, we do track it. We don't report it here. I think just because it's not like new, it's sort of our baseline, I guess, but we could report it. It's something that we continue to provide. We certainly can share that and
I
provide
understand,
updates on
I
it,
understand. Thank you
yeah.
for all the good work that this plan represents. I was just wondering why that wasn't one of the elements.
Sure.
There's a bit of boundary issues when you start talking about climate and you say, what's under your operational control? And some of these things are not under our operational control, so they don't get included in our reporting, although they're, for lack of a better word, they're good pieces of good work that we are involved in and we help facilitate across the region. You know, we've been involved with community solar gardens for a while. We have 15 megawatts of subscription to this community solar garden. Environmental service with Jason Willett was here, not only promoters of community solar garden, they are also they also took advantage and they have behind the meter. Transit's got behind the meter as well, which is fairly small. As it looks at our operations, you know, we look at cost as well, and what can we do? Currently, we just looked at a project, and it's like they want us to put, you know, be part of E3, they want us to put solar on, or we can sign up with Excel's Renewable Connect. To put the solar on, you're looking at close to $200,000 in year zero. To pay a penny an extra kilowatt to get Renewable Connect, you're talking $750 a year for 20, you know, it's like, that's not hard math to do. I can net present value that in my sleep. Working with the utility is the good move at that point in time because it doesn't have that initial investment and it's an ongoing thing. It's like, yeah, it's slightly more expensive than just buying regular electricity from Excel, but when you look at the benefit, it's like, it beats what our alternatives are to be completely green and renewable on that, so.
Yeah, I just want to see us get credit in all those ways as a part of what we're reporting on as well.
And as we move to reporting on our work against the Imagine 2050, I think you'll see more of that
Great.
sort of reporting there. Thank you.
So
Thank you, Mr.
I'm gonna jump in with my own question, I might be over here. This is on metrics, because following up a little bit of what you're saying. Have we considered adding a financial metric? And by what I mean is everything we've kind of looked at, except for maybe working with Excel to pay more to have it from better sources. But when we're reducing the power usage so significantly, wasn't that book that the guy wrote From Green to Gold, the actual financial benefit? And I think this day and age, I hate to say it, but we need to make a case to even some of those that might be detractors saying, what are you doing focusing on climate? If we can kind of show like, hey, this is the taxpayer funds, these are the fees that we've saved by being smart. And sometimes that's an investment, but it has a huge return.
Yeah, we're working on being able to capture some more of that within our energy cap program as far as assigning things. I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, I'll call it back in the napkin calculation.
Yeah.
At Metro Transit, we have energy conservation money that's funded through the FTA, spent off in about $1 million a year. We've been doing this since probably 2003, 2004. Over that period of time, we've collected what we think is about, I can go back and do the math, but just quickly wrapping it up, it's like, yeah, it's probably $25 million. And a couple of years ago, I did some real swagging. And came up with, I think we probably saved $40 to $50 million on that $25 million that we've invested over that 20 plus year time frame. So those are the kinds of things, as we have more staff and the ability to dive into these things and baseline some of the, where we started from and what the annualized savings are and calculate it in there and say, this is what we've saved ongoing. Because that is an important part of the number for people to see that
I think it'd
we
be
are saving
really
you
part
money. We're saving money by being proactive in this. Nobody's opposed to saving money.
Well, and I just think if we added a metric, I think challenge is gonna be not to hire 3 people to get it done to the last decimal point, but something much more ballparkish,
Yeah.
just to give us a flavor of what it is is part of this report, cause I think then it kind of shows not only is it an environmental benefit, but we're actually modeling something that makes a lot of sense. All right, Gail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was one comment I had, and then I have a comment and then an ask. So I've been, meeting with all my communities and talking about the 2050 plan, and this dovetails into it so well because it shows what the council is doing. And it's really interesting when you talk to a community and citizens and climate plan, climate action work plan, sometimes eyes get crossed and heads roll and stuff like that. But then we're talking about infrastructure and what that means, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I get it. So my ask is, how do you take this presentation and distill it in a cheat sheet for me? It could be a page, not more than a page and a half, on just, here are the successes in these categories that the Met Council is doing for themselves. And then after we'll get the finances, then you add it on as well. Because I think it's really important when we're having a planning tool across the region that we're leading ourselves and accomplishing things. And so I think I'd like to be prepared to say, we're, part of the planning and 2050 plan, as you're being asked to do this, we are doing this as well, and we have people here that can help, and et cetera.
Councilmember Cedarburg, can I enter into a negotiation with you?
Of course.
If you're willing to give us a page and a half, could we get 2 full pages?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, really bullets, because this could be my resource.
Yep.
But it's the talking points, and I think maybe no other council member wants it, but I would love to have it. And I'm just out and about, and this comes up a lot, and it's like, but we are doing it ourselves. And,
We need to be able to tell people that our conscious effort to invest in our infrastructure and improve the resiliency of our systems is really a commitment to the public.
And the communities need that as well. They've got, stormwater issues, and they've got this and the same thing. And so, like I said, we're talking about an environment committee, what tours should we have that we could maybe open up, so maybe we do go down to the new plant here and talk about that, and invite some people and things like that. But that would be my comment and my ask, so thank you.
Great,
No more
Peter.
than 2.
I was gonna say, so this is the type of stuff we talk about at the Climate Action Work Group.
Yeah.
Once a month, and Nick, Sue, you committed to be on it for the next 50 years, right?
Keep showing
I got
up.
the look.
Not funny.
You got the eye roll.
No, it wasn't an eye roll, it was a glare.
Your eyes.
Concerned with the art stare.
Point being, we may have a spot open. We do have a spot open, so if this interests you, you are more than welcome to join the team, because it's super fascinating. Love the financial aspect of it, just thinking about that 40% low dissolved oxygen. Holy cow, that is money, I believe.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'd love to see that as well. Jeff and I serve on the state's Office of Enterprise Sustainability Steering Committee, led by the Lieutenant Governor. And I believe at that last meeting, we said that we were gonna be hiring some energy managers. Is that still the plan?
Yes.
Okay, good, we weren't liars then. We're in the good graces of the Lieutenant Governor.
Sam
Well, at least not about that.
Sam Group
Yeah.
is in the process, they're evaluating applications at this moment. They have an SME, and I think they're within a few days away of getting back to HR.
SMEs.
No pressure.
I'm sorry. Subject matter experts that can help to evaluate the applications, and they're probably within a week or two of going forward with HR to say, these are the people we want to interview in a structured panel interview. I hired back just before that we had the last meeting, I had hired a person to focus on energy besides myself. We're also in the process of hiring a natural systems coordinator within Metro Transit. That position is the interviews are Friday at 4. Who did that? On Memorial Day weekend. I know, self-inflicted wound. But yeah, so we are working to staff some of what we've identified as needs. It's incumbent on all the divisions to put together plans to figure out where their needs are and start to get those requests in and start to move them forward so we can have a full team across the divisions and we can do more of that cross-cutting work.
So as this is a public meeting, I feel like it's also an opportunity to advertise that there are current positions that are still open so that we can have more people join us in this work. And so if you want to pass this within your networks, I know that there's a climate planner position open within CD. And there's going to be, again, future positions with other divisions coming forward as we continue to staff out.
And for everybody's awareness, this Office of Enterprise Sustainability is a kind of a part of the Waltz administration. Although we're not a state agency, we have peers where we compare, publish our metrics, they do a consolidated work, and the idea is that the state has its own footprint. What are we doing for ourselves? So that started under the Dayton administration, and I think it's gotten to be fairly powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were originally kind of a tail.
Yeah.
And then we showed up with our emissions for the first year, and as Laura, at that time, we were the purple block of opportunity. We dwarfed all the other agencies combined as the Metropolitan Council. They said,
You're important.
you're more important than we thought.
We got our competitive juices going. Yeah, Chai.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this great initiative and we're putting serious thought and effort into this, especially looking at our workforce gaps. I know not a lot of, some people still doubt, climate change, but it's a very real thing and it's reoccurring the world as we speak. The president's remarks about wanting to take over Greenland is based on the fact that as the ice caps melt, we and the Russians and the Chinese are going to fight to have the mining rights and the fishery rights and to base missiles there. So if Russians get there first, then we have to intercept their missiles, and the closest logical place would be Greenland. And so this is really important work that we have to really be at the forefront of. So thanks for putting serious thought and effort into this.
All right, Peter, you get the last
Quickly,
word.
on that, on the 40% low oxygen project, and one of the questions was about partnerships. We probably partner with MinTap every year. I know we did last year on energy efficiency training. Did one of us remember to tell MinTap about this pilot project so that they can then tell other, because they're working with plants all across the state.
Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom, so my group actually has a contract with MinTap, so we help support interns, for council members who don't know, we help support interns throughout the region to work with industry to lower their water usage, so to identify those conservation or efficiency wins within industry, so that hopefully we can have more water supply available for the rest of us, for whether it's population growth or just keeping it in the ground. And so yes, I will make sure that we connect the story back with them.
And the very last word on the environmental justice, the ink was not dry on Imagine 2050 before equity water efficiency grants, $200K for water efficient toilets was approved. So we're rolling on that.
Thank you very much.
We have a tap intern starting next week to focus on waste and water within Metro Transit.
Intern starting?
An intern, you're right. So I get for changing your title.
That's right.
That's true.
Well, thank you so much for this report. That was
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
And wait, council, there's more. We're gonna hear about the audit committee update and do you have a 40-page PowerPoint and a team of people coming?
And I wanna give Matt a shout out, he moved up to accommodate, so we're
Yeah.
gonna have 3 topics next time and 1 this time.
Yeah.
So I even told him he didn't even need a PowerPoint today, I said we take it however you could do it on short time. So thank you, Matt, I wanna publicly state that.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. So for the record, I'm Matt Latour, the Chief Audit Executive, and yes, there's a lot of slides in this deck, but I'm gonna go relatively quickly. I threw together a combination of a few decks. I've given presentations for the audit committee and some other venues in the last year or so. So please stop me as I go, ask questions, can be a little bit conversational, but the intent here, objective-wise, is just to increase your awareness of internal audit and related activities. So I'm gonna walk through, there's an agenda on the right. We'll discuss a little bit of the roles and responsibilities of the audit committee and the council, and some of the areas of responsibility as we sort of increase the areas of responsibility for the audit committee. And then I also wanna flag some business items, probably a consent, but business items that come before the council in the coming months. So just sort of tee that up so you have some awareness of what's coming. So the way this will work, we'll talk about the internal audit function, talk a little bit about the documents that give us authority, talk a little bit about current audit activities in the audit plan. I've got a few slides benchmarking, so if you're asking the question, how do we look compared to other peer agencies in the public sector, we'll talk about that a little bit. Some things that I'm working on for this year, and then again, walk through the upcoming council. So just a little bit of background, I sit in a very unique place in the organization, reporting to you, to the council through the chair and the audit committee. Just I and the general counsel have that unique relationship. I do report administratively to Ryan, for day-to-day operations, but this is the classic way that internal audit is set up in an organization. And I'll talk a little bit about the reasons for that. Just a bit about auditors. So I think whenever I introduce myself to people who don't know what I do, they think of an accountant. I'm not an accountant. Auditors come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Some of you may have heard of the Office of State Auditor, the Office of Legislative Auditor. The State Auditor does our financial books. That's the accounting team that really goes in and does a lot of testing around their finances. Legislative Auditor does a lot of different things, including financial audits, but also has done some high-profile work with the council doing program evaluations for Southwest Light Rail and some other things. There are also auditors that do compliance reviews. So think about the Federal Transit Administration, NPCA, the state safety oversight does our rail safety. And of course, there's auditors at the IRS, right, that do our taxes and do that kind of auditing. Internal auditors are a little bit different. We are paid by the council, so we work for you, we're part of the organization. But we, as I mentioned before, with the reporting relationship, we're thought of to be a bit independent from the rest of the organization. We share the same organizational goals and objectives, and we report to the board as a best practice. Having an internal audit function is really, from a financial perspective, considered to be a best practice for fraud prevention and good governance. But just to sort of draw that distinction that, we're not, I'm not independent in the sense that I work for another organization or have some other master I work for, Metropolitan Council, just like everyone else here. So what we do, internal audits, obviously. I also have a role in coordinating the external audits that I mentioned, and that varies depending on the organization who's doing the audit work. But I often have a role all the way up from coordinating every piece of paper that goes between the external and the internal organization to just knowing that it's happening and kind of going along for the ride. We also do investigations on a range of topics, primary lead on things like fraud and conflict of interest, but also delve into other areas as well if it's needed for various reasons. I own a few procedures, the fraud, the code of ethics, conflict of interest procedures. We also do special projects, inquiries, advising. This can take all kinds of forms. I get a lot of ethics questions. I work with the General Counsel a lot, just did that a few hours ago. Whenever there's just questions over, is this okay? Does this meet our code of ethics? Is this financial thing okay? These take all sorts of shapes and sizes. And then we also have a role in reviewing contractor overhead rates, which is a kind of a unique thing in the council. So just a little bit about the framework. So I'll walk through this piece by piece, but essentially there are 4 documents that give us our authority, all very important. The first is the council bylaws. So the council bylaws establishes that there needs to be an audit committee. And just of note, it is listed separately from standing, advisory, or special committees. It's its own thing. It's not the same as the management or other committees. And it's not the same as the advisory committees. It's an audit committee. And I'll talk a little bit more about what it looks like and the roles and responsibilities there as we go through. There is an audit policy. This is another thing that is a purview of the council. And there is some overlap in these documents, but this again sort of establishes the need for an audit committee, provides a little bit more detail. It affirms council support for having an internal audit department and prescribes the reporting relationships, which is a very important piece of this to assert the independence of the department. And a very key point here is affirming the right of access to information. So to do our work, we really need to have access to essentially every piece of information the council has. We take this very seriously and we don't ask for it unless we need it. So I'd say I have access to everything, but it's not only if I have a business need for it. If we're doing an audit work or we're doing an investigation or something that prescribes that we need the information. And we treat it the same way the business unit does in terms of data protection, data privacy, the Government Data Practices Act. So there's 2 charters that further define the audit area. So the audit committee charter, that is again the purview of the council. So council, this is one of the things we'll be asking for approval in the coming weeks. This defines the purpose of the audit committee, provides for areas of advice and guidance. It defines the authority, the composition, terms, and operational principles of the committee. And it also says things like the audit committee is the place where the state auditor enters and exits with the board. So we do in our meetings in the spring and in the summer, we have the state auditor come and discuss their planned work and the results of their work at the audit committee. Then there's a separate document that the audit committee approves that gives the department essentially its purpose, mission, and authorities. So a couple of other things here, memorializes IAA standards as our guidance. The IAA is the Institute of Internal Auditors. It's an international standard setting body that writes something called the Red Book. And that is the way that we, that's the standards we follow to do all of our work. Creates sort of an international best practice and prescribes, a lot of the things I'm talking about, or we'll talk about basically how to do the work at a high level. The department charter also gives us our authority, again, restated, unrestricted access to data, and again, the reporting relationship. And there's a lot more to it. I'll talk about it a little bit. Another slide on this, but this is basically restating. I guess I'd probably highlight here the CAE, that's my title. I'll refer to that as the shorthand. I have some responsibilities. These are things that I need to bring to the audit committee periodically, a lot of things annually. It talks about the audit committee's role in terms of vis-a-vis the internal audit function, and a couple other things. So a little bit of who we are. The picture's a little bit dated. We're taking some new pictures this year, but the org chart is up to date. We have 12 FTEs currently. Myself, I have an audit coordinator, Tammy, who does a lot of the administrative role. That has a lot of responsibility for audits and investigations. There's 2 audit managers, and then you can see the listing of the team below. A little bit about us. This is the metrics I use in terms of how I define our qualifications. So the metrics chosen are 10 years of professional experience, 5 years of audit experience. The professional certifications, the CIA is a certification I hold, Certified Internal Auditor. The CISA is similar, but it's more specific to information security. And then there's a couple other listed there, and then advanced degrees. So most of our team actually comes from a public policy background. Not all, but most of them. Probably about 3/4 of the team went to the Humphrey, got an MPP. A lot of the team started as interns, and they hooked them through the internship program and kept them with us. We really, our focus has been to really try to grow from within, promote from within. So we invest a lot in training, we invest in certifications, and we push staff to take on increasing responsibilities. And in part, auditors are not necessarily the easiest things to recruit for. Internal audit is kind of known for a field that people get into, they learn a lot and then they go do something else. So it's really been a challenge to hire from the outside. We've been successful in some cases, but it's really important for us to kind of recruit and retain and train. Just a little bit about the department over my tenure. We've grown. We're about double in size over, about 8 years. When I first started here, I think I was the longest tenured auditor maybe in year 2. A lot of turnover early. So that was a big focus. On the last slide, it says that our average tenure is now 5 years. So that was a big focus for me, is keeping people in we have. We've grown. I'll say that a lot of that is driven from taking what used to be a very individual approach to auditing. So each person would have one audit they were working on. We do everything in teams now. So we have 2 or 3 people assigned for every project. I think that's just a way that, it's a better way to look at problems, is to have that diverse view. We're a very diverse team. So that has kind of necessitated some growth, and I think we really have, as I'll talk through some of the risks to the council, there's a lot of work to do and a lot we still have to do. We've also expanded in terms of getting expertise from the outside. So if you look at the budget, so the staff count is the first line, the second line is our budget. And the green part of that is third-party resources. So we've expanded, and this in part, frankly, was as we've gone through the green line experience the last couple of years, thinking about future capital projects. So we've taken on a third party. They're actually in town this week, doing a closeout and a real estate audit of the gold mine. And that's where some of that extra dollars has grown, is kind of getting third-party consulting when we think we need it. And it also is reflecting, we've taken on more of a role in investigations over time. So that's also some third-party investigative work. Also looking forward, thinking about adding some additional IT expertise as well, because that is, auditors are hard to hire and hard to retain. IT auditors are almost impossible because they have such valuable skills really anywhere. The third chart is just showing our budget to our actuals. Really the reason for the gap in the split in the lines is because we started budgeting for the additional services and it took a little bit longer than expected to get them going. So we're now kind of catching up to where our budgeted spending is. So I'm not gonna go through this in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just before you leave that kind of trend line and what you see there in terms of the growth, and I mean, I think we can see it in terms of your ability to work in teams across different, and folks close to the audit committee see it all the time too, I know. I guess my question, as the state has had a conversation about waste, fraud, abuse, like at the legislature through the session, that impacts, cabinet agencies quite a bit, and the governor's been involved, and we're adjacent to all of that, but not far. How are agencies structured when it comes to some of their internal audit capabilities? I'm kind of ignorant to it. I'm just curious, do we feel similar? Are we kind of structured differently because we're an independent entity and that they kind of do it more on an enterprise scale? Could you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it varies quite a bit in terms of the organization, right? And so MnDOT has a bigger internal audit function than other agencies.
They're robust and they have a dedicated structural revenue side.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, another way to think about this though is the legislative auditor is sort of like the internal auditor for the state.
Okay.
So we have our own board, so we have our own internal audit function. So it varies a little bit, and different agencies have different size departments. Some are just like a person or two, they're very small, and they do very specific things.
Thanks. We always spend our time talking about other local government entities and how we compare, or the University of Minnesota, but I've never actually talked about the state enterprise, so.
Yeah. It's a little
And then there's the state auditor, which is more financial.
Right. So I'm not gonna walk through this entirely in detail, but this is a list of what we're working on right now. This is by far the biggest list we've ever had. And in part, the ones with the blue boxes with the asterisks are third party, so that's the ones that Towson Solutions is working on. And there's some that we've been doing change order reviews at the green line. we're not really actively working that right now. We've been waiting for the legislative auditor to finish, and now I have to get my staff kind of realigned to kind of do a couple more of those and finish that out as we wrap up that project. But just an overall list of what we're working on right now. Here, this is a list for the next 6 to 12 months looking out. So probably just a note on this, the way we select these projects, my audit committee members are very familiar with. We do what's called a risk assessment for the organization. So it's my team does, it ranges year by year, but it's somewhere between 50 and 80 meetings with folks all around the council to ask them about risks they're facing. We take into account information we receive through complaints. We take into account broader industry trends. We'll look at things like cybersecurity. You'll see in the next page, AI is just on the list because everybody's talking about AI and how we're going to use it. So that's how we derive this list. I would say we create a bigger list than we can even tackle in a year, and then as we have staff availability, we're ready for the next one, we'll kind of reassess like what on this list is the most important things or what we have the right staff to tackle.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what would you be auditing with the investments program and the Blue Line readiness, extension readiness?
The Blue Line readiness is actually, that is the Towson solution. So they did actually an independent risk assessment of just the capital program. And that is one of the areas that they're proposing to look at as Blue Line starts to operationalize. So they're thinking about, do we have the right staff? Do we have the right controls in place to sort of like, design and build the project?
Okay, and how about the investments?
The investments program, I can get back to you on exactly what we have in mind there. This one I'm pretty sure is actually one of those that we identified in a policy and procedure that hadn't been looked at in a long time, that internal audit is supposed to be doing regularly and we hadn't. So we put it on the audit plan, and likely the way this will work, and so the way our audit process works is we create pretty vague topics and we do an engagement level risk assessment as we start the work. So we'd meet with Mark Thompson, who runs our investments, and ask him, what are key risks, and sort of identifies the risks and controls. We have a matrix that we put together that looks at, within investments, are we balanced the right way? Are we, tracking our investments over time? Things like that. And then we'll decide specifically what we're going to audit within the blue box, if you will.
Thank you, Chair. And for your response. The reason why I'm thinking about that, it kind of ties into what the chair was saying in terms of, the benefits of our investments and how is our organization doing against plans. And when we look at risk assessments, I think it's really important to look at the benefits and the opportunities, and not just the opportunities, but are we leaking in opportunities or underinvesting in certain areas? Now, this may not be audit related, but I was just really curious about what a person was thinking when they put the investment program as a category. But
And no mystery, we're embarking on a time period where we may be accumulating reserves. Investment disciplines are a consideration.
Sure.
Maybe more
thank you.
Thanks for the question. This is looking out even further. So these are things that we don't even think we'll be able to get to, but we thought it was interesting enough to include it. So again, AI is on there. Some new programs like paid family leave and ESST. Anytime there's sort of something new, it's often something we'll put on the plan. I'd say this is really, the way I look at the audit plan is it's almost constantly evolving. We really update it probably every 6 months or so to reflect work we already completed and new emerging trends. So, this is an area for council members. If there's areas of interest, please let me know. And we're always happy to take ideas. Even if we can't do it right away. One thing to know is we'll balance out with other work going on. So if the OLA is working on something, or if there's a big project that is doing an evaluation with a consultant, we might stay out of that for a while because we've got coverage somewhere else. But it's always something to consider for the future. This is just a list of other projects, in part just to reflect for the audit committee how we balance our time. So, I mean, things like continuous improvement, we're doing a software implementation internally, working on enterprise risk management and some other things. Follow-up is always a key part of, I'll talk about this a little bit later when I show some metrics that we track. This is just to show, this is a common slide we show at audit committee that just reflects how we use our time during the year. So we actually track our time a little bit like a consulting firm does, and we track hours we spend on certain audits and other activities. So the big orange is audits, you know, the blue is the administrative time that we're not quite sure how to code, or it's just, you know, that's whatever else. And then other things that, you know, you can see like the investigations is the light blue, and that kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year depending on what we're working on. Training, I'm not sure what happened in May, but we probably had a couple staff that went to do some, like this month this year we all went to a conference at the same time. So sometimes we have those little bubbles. The yellow is the risk assessment. If you can see the little bubble in September, so that we do a lot of work around the risk assessment at certain times a year. So just kind of show it ebbs and flows, and there's a lot of different things we're working on at a given time. This is just a list, and you know, if you can reflect back on this, but these are audits that we finished in the past 4 years. So quite a bit of work that we've completed. This is how we track our recommendations. So every audit report we issue, for the most part, has recommendations for implementation. So really the way to think about that is, you know, our independence, it's not for me to tell you exactly what to do, it's to make a recommendation. It's up to management to take those actions. And we track how often those recommendations are implemented, or at least partially implemented. The relatively good news here is that the further left you go on that green band, that means those recommendations further back are more implemented. The big gray blob in 2024 are not due yet. So usually we put a timeline on it, maybe 6 months or a year. So that's just to say we haven't gotten to the point where we're checking up on follow-up yet. To the extent we have not implemented recommendations, I'd say a lot of those end up being in the IT space, and part of that is IT recommendations aren't always easy to implement in the short term, and we know that. So it might be, you know, improve this control around user administration, but that can take years really to implement from an IT perspective. So we do bring back Gretchen White to our audit committee frequently just to update on where they are with her recommendations.
Gail, did you have a question?
Well, I have a question on the slide before with the years. So I've done a lot of auditing in my past life too, and so do you use risk assessment and the audit results to know when you're gonna cycle back and do another audit? Because it doesn't make sense to do, we're gonna do every 5 years if the risk is that how you decide how to go back and cycle through this again?
Yeah, it's one of the factors. Time since last audit is one of the considerations, and that includes also state audits and legislative audits. And we do actually, when we issue recommendations, it's a change I made a few years ago, we actually identify, is this a risk that we've identified that's significant enough for us to go back and actually retest the whole, do the audit again? Or is it something we can just kick to follow up? Or is it something that we'll just kind of handle through the next risk assessments kind of going forward? So that is one way we triage, and sometimes we end up doing pretty substantial work after the fact. And other times, you know, we'll make the points and move on. So.
Thank you.
I will say our audit committee has been, one of the strengths of our audit committees, they've been very, they remind us frequently about making sure that we're doing follow-up. That it's not enough to just issue the report, but to also think about what happens next. So. I'll just fly through a couple of these. These are just examples of some closed items that we have, so some actual results. Looking back at last year, and I really just want to highlight, here's some of the external audit coordination we did. I'll mention just the triennial. I mentioned legislative audit before. The triennial is a pretty significant effort for our team. It happens every 3 years. It's the FTA's major oversight of each transit agency. It's a significant lift for our team, and we really are on point for this, in part because it takes an enterprise lens to coordinate all the activities, because we've got pockets of regional administration, Metro Transit, obviously, MTS. So there needs to be somebody in RA that coordinates all of this. We collected documents last year for the organization, and this year will be the on-site in September. So that's a week where most of my staff really ends up spending a lot of time with the FDA consultants. I'll touch on ethics compliance. I've mentioned this a few times, but a couple things we do here. We support the tool, which is the ethics point reporting tool. So we don't own all of the complaints, if you will, but we administer the tool from behind the scenes, in part because we have that independent spot in the organization. So there are times where we'll triage, we'll make sure that the right people are getting access to systems, and also there's times where we just need to pull reports of all complaints across the system. So that's a role we do. Last year, just to give you a lens on this, we touched about 31 complaints. So some of those are pretty easy, they're not really complaints, they're something else, and it's just passing it on. But it resulted in about 17 investigations. And we supported 3 others. And another thing that I actually prefer to do in a lot of cases is take information we're receiving through Ethics Point and actually turn it into an audit, because investigations are really focused on people, audits are more focused on internal controls. And in the long run, we really want to be in that space where we're improving the internal controls to avoid complaints in the first place. So when there's a breach, we provide support there. Cybersecurity, another area we're focused on. We have a strategic plan, and we're supporting the RA strategic plan. And a couple things, I mentioned up above just about other roles that I take on. Incident command is one. I was the planning chief through the pandemic, and I'm among the incident commanders. There are several for future incidents within our incident command structure. Policies and procedures, we do some work there, culture ambassador, and some other things. So just a little bit about the audit committee. So Chair Lee and Councilmember Avento from our committee are here today. We meet quarterly, approve the annual risk assessment, risk-based plan. I mentioned the entrance and the exit. Our department charters are all responsibilities of the audit committee. This is hard to read up on the screen, but I make a pitch today. We have 2 vacancies on our audit committee for council members. It's only a quarterly meeting, and it's very interesting material. You can ask
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to do a follow-up.
Yeah.
I remember when I was asked to consider being on this committee thinking, I know nothing about accounting. I was one of those who thought this was about accounting. And I will tell you that I've learned so much being on this particular committee. I think I can speak for you, Councilmember Lee, and for Councilmember Barber. It's just a fascinating committee to be on. Not only do we have highly capable, just whip-smart staff led by Matt, but the community members really bring a lot, and it's just a great committee. So if you're inclined, I'd encourage you to consider it. And when, I won't say if, but when the 2 new members join the council, I hope you'll encourage them to consider it, because it's a great way to learn a lot about the organization, kind of lifting the hood of the car and getting a really good look at how the system functions. So I want to do a real shout out to Matt and Tammy for, just all the great support you provide to those of us who are committee members. It really makes it beneficial. So thank you.
And Sue and Shai, thank you for your service. I do think this committee is so important for our engagement and great benefit of these community members who are part of it.
Mr. Chair, could I add one more thing?
Sure, but let me respond quickly to something you said. I want you to realize it is my intention to really encourage one of the 2 new to come for the reason you've said.
Yep.
But I'm also hopeful that one of the other 2 positions might be somebody from, not everybody's here, but somebody from this body who has more experience. So I encourage anybody who may have an interest, and if you don't, I'll find you to let me know. Or Matt, or Ryan, or Sue will tell me. If you have any interest, you can talk to Sue. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I was just gonna say that I'll be happy to arm twist anybody you want me to arm twist, so. Gently.
Thank you, Ms. Councilmember Bento. We'll be transitioning 2 of our community members. So if I didn't mention this, just 4 that are from the community, and they're typically people who have generally, they're people who have my equivalent role at other public sector organizations. So we've had the U of M and the Minsky chief auditors, they're rolling off. Now we'll have the chief auditor from the MAC and Deanna, who's the chief ethics compliance officer at Ramsey County, joining the chief auditor at Hennepin County, and Gracie, who's from Protiviti, consultant that focuses on risk management. So it's a really good model, I think. I've talked to some of my peers and they're actually pretty jealous of what we have here in terms of a model. So I won't dwell too much on this, respectful of time, but this is kind of a general breakdown of how we present our work. I actually feel fortunate. We present our reports to the audit committee, and I think that can be a lever to highlight the work we're doing, but also it kind of forces the management to the table, honestly. I know a lot of other functions, especially in the public sector, don't report every single report. We do, and I think it's helpful. But this is just a list of things we do. We have closed sessions, so you might see things like investigations up here that typically we wouldn't talk about in public, but we do close the meeting pretty frequently to discuss things that are either security or investigative related, employment related. I have just a series, I won't dwell on these, but this is just, we talked about this last year at the audit committee workshop we did, benchmarking against other, this is using a survey of my peers across the industry. So I've highlighted some of the public sector, but these are areas that internal audit functions often do, and I put the stars next to areas we do. And it shows that we're consistent with a lot of our peers in the public sector doing investigations, whistleblower programs, and compliance work. Our size is relatively, we're a little bit above 50%, but we're right around the middle ground of public sector audit functions. These are some areas of the audit plan, so it just kind of compares what we're working on. Some of the operational and compliance areas that we work on are similar to what our peers work on. These are some key risk areas, like cybersecurity is pretty much number one for everybody these days. And if it's not that, it's IT related issues that are kind of related, but similar. We have I think the right balance of reporting relationships. I feel pretty good about the stature and the situation in the organization, our independence. 4 meetings a year is kind of the target for most public sector organizations. It's pretty normal. I feel bad for the people who have to do 12. And this is just really, we've been shifting to add enterprise risk management, cybersecurity. We've done a lot more of filling our agendas with reports from management on these topics, and that's consistent with other internal audit functions, audit committees around the country. So I've mentioned earlier, 2 things happened in the past 6 months that affect our charters and our organization. So the first is that the IA standards I mentioned changed. So they updated, as they do periodically, the standards and added several new requirements. That in of itself would require us to update the audit framework. The other thing we did last fall, I can't remember now when it was, October, we had a peer review panel convened by APTA that came in. So it was 4 other chief auditors from transit agencies, WMATA, Sound Transit, Austin Metro, that came in to review our audit function. They did a lot of interviews, looked at a couple of projects we did, reviewed our work, and came up with some recommendations for us to implement. They also did a gap analysis against the new standards. So they basically gave us, 100 action items to do to make sure our function is in compliance with IA standards. So this will necessitate some updates. You'll see those coming through the council in the coming weeks and probably months. There's a little bit of dance I'm doing to make, it's probably better to have the new committee, the new audit committee, seated before we have these all approved. So I haven't run them yet, probably will once we have a full committee. So that might affect the timing. But basically you'll see the audit framework started with the audit policy, the audit committee charter, will come to the council. Obviously I'll put together a list of changes that will show you what we're doing that's different. And then the audit committee will approve our audit department charter. And I'm just going to go to this. This is the list of conformance gaps we had. I'll say that it was generally viewed as a positive result. We had a generally conforms, which is kind of auditor speak for you're doing a good job. it's the highest rating we can get, it's generally conformed, so. There's some areas that we need to improve on for sure. I think I probably knew everything and walked them through, here's all the areas that I think we need to improve day one, and they reflected that back to me. There's things like developing QAIP as a quality assurance and improvement plan. We do a lot of this work, we just had never written it down. So it's a lot of the same advice we give to management often, is like, write it down, so yes, we will do that. And here's just a list of things that they suggested we do, and it's certainly things that are within our purview to handle, so. Here's another list of improvement opportunities that are more within. A key part of this is we'll be getting audit management software. It's actually what's called a governance risk compliance tool. So it'll incorporate internal audit, enterprise risk management, internal control, and possibly policies and procedures in the long run. And it's a way to manage all of this space and leverage Phil Wall-Jasper, Kathy Matter have been implementing enterprise risk management at the council. So kind of fold that in, and we'll be able to leverage that for risk assessment, hopefully scale back a little bit of what we do and use what's already there. I think that's probably.
As you leave that topic, Mr. Chair, I don't remember if you were in the final debrief for that too, but so when the APTA team in this room, I think you were.
Yeah.
So when they finished, they did a final debrief. I think they did one with the audit committee as well. And they also did one with the chair and I to walk through. And the one thing that doesn't show up on there that I would just also highlight was in the in the interviews of the different staff groups that they talked to, they were complimentary of how Matt's team both has credibility in the work they're doing to do internal audit, but they're not hated across the organization. And that's a backhanded way to get it a compliment. But when it comes to this type of area where you're kind of seen as pseudo-regulatory, here to seek stuff out, they highlighted that as one of the most consistent things that came up in interviews was they're viewed as helpful, not oppositional. And
Which is rare.
Yep, and I wanted to raise that, 'cause I thought it was a really important point, and you don't want to be overly friendly, frankly, your job's not to make friends, but it proves there's a way to do the work credibly without having to make it just all fight all the time.
Yeah, we've always tried not to be gotcha. I mean, it really is. The thing I say to my team and say to managers is like, we're really forward looking. I mean, you know, we can look back at 2023 and find something, but like, it's not helpful to have you just go correct something. Let's try to prevent the mistake in the future. And I think that helps a lot with the tone and the credibility of the work and just like the willingness to go along with improving the organization. So it's been kind of our philosophy. So here's just a list. These are the things that'll come before the council at some point. Just want to give you a heads up about that. So when they come, you don't need to say, who again is this internal audit? What do they do? So that's all I have.
Sue?
Councilmember Johnson wasn't able to be here tonight, but she wanted me to just share that she was chair, Lee's predecessor as chair of the audit committee. And like others, she learned a lot under Matt's tutelage and she really appreciated it. She suggests that you give biannual updates to the management committee, Matt. So if that's something that could be considered, she thinks it would be a good idea for the management committee to hear updates from the audit committee, as if you don't have anything else to do. And Councilmember Johnson also pointed out that Matt was a key leader during the COVID pandemic process. So in addition to continuing to run the audit, the audit team, he was taking on that COVID leadership role and did just a remarkable job, as no big surprise, but certainly deserves a lot of kudos and thank you. So
thank you. I'm always happy. I mean, like, even Ryan asked me to do this on Thursday. But I have a lot of this information ready. I mean, and it's certainly not a problem to, bring it to whatever audiences are appropriate. And it'd be helpful to know what like the targeted message would be for different committees, but otherwise I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, go ahead, Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, another kudos to Matt. He didn't mention this earlier, but I think part of the reason we have great staff retention is because Matt and the team support folks on staff who want to further their professional development, getting additional certificates, and I think that I think we're grateful for that. I think that could be an example for other departments to follow as they try to grow their own bench of workers.
I forgot to mention, I should really recognize the hard work my staff puts in. I mean, I think you see it, they come and talk to the audit committee, it's not me presenting this work, it's them, because they know it. It is Internal Audit Awareness Month. So it's actually, to some extent, it was a good timing to get this in.
We knew.
Treats on the table.
I am unsolicited, I unsolicited had one of my staff write a piece for a national magazine about what a great job this is for people with intellectual curiosity.
Oh, yeah.
So we're gonna, I don't know if it should be published there, but we're gonna turn it into a wire piece coming up here,
Excellent.
so I'll forward that to the group and please
great.
read the wire, but it was really inspiring to hear how she viewed this role as being more than just
Mr. Chair, could I ask which staff person wrote it? I'm sorry?
Sydney Gloucester.
Okay.
Mr. Alright.
Just last comment, I mean, it comes up as it's always a thing within audit is on the finding side is how do you do implementation, how do you cut across an organization that, you know, grew up in these different like areas of work. And so the one other piece of structural work that probably matters to this, I just would mention, and Matt plays a role, and Lisa plays a role, and Lisa plays a role, and me, everyone in this room sitting in the audience plays a role. As a sub-cabinet group, the deputy RA, Phil, has led the development of what's called the forum, and it's this cross-functional group now across the organization of senior leaders. It's the senior most like implementation group in the organization. And for a long time, we kind of had this like executive team that was a mix of both strategy and implementation, and that got confusing for what are we here to do today, and are we decision-making or sharing information, et cetera, and we've worked to break that apart. And so, for example, like the forum's had 2 meetings now, right? I mean, it's brand new. It's just started as an every other week meeting that coincides with cabinet so we can go back and forth. Building security and standardization across how we approach protocol and process for building security across a big operation is like one of the topics right away. It's like, let's stop like observing it's a thing. Let's also stop just saying we need a strategy around it. Let's like have a team that can implement that and come back and say what the implementation plan is. And so my hope is that as you see us ramp up the number of audits, and you've played an integral role in being a part of making sure it fits with the needs here, that we have the right voices of business plus these types of areas to make sure we can have a better velocity of implementation and be more consistent. So when you do a future audit, it all checks out.
With that, see no other questions. Thanks everyone. And Matt especially, congratulations, thank you. I really appreciate this presentation and we'll stay in touch soon.
Thank you all for the time.
Yeah, happy Memorial Day, everyone, and stay safe. There is no word from the Capitol that we have a group budget, so we'll just stay tuned for that too. This meeting's adjourned.